The old man sat on his porch in the fading September light, his hands working a piece of pine with the kind of patience that comes from knowing you have more time behind you than ahead. The cabin perched on the mountainside like an eagle's nest, looking down on a valley that seemed to stretch all the way to yesterday. His grandson sat beside him, 13 years old, and uncomfortable with the silence the way young people always are, fidgeting with the hem of his city-bought coat. Daniel watched his grandfather's hands. They moved with a certainty that made the knife seem like an extension of his fingers, curling the wood into something that was starting to look like a whistle. The boy had been there 3 days and still had not figured out why his mother insisted he spend time with a man who lived so far from everything that mattered. Grandpa Daniel said, finally breaking the quiet the way a stone breaks water. "Why do you live so far from everyone? Do you not get lonely?" Josiah Brennan did not stop whittling. His hands kept their rhythm, shaving thin curls of wood that fell like snow onto the worn boards of the porch. "Lonely and alone are different things, boy," he said. His voice had the texture of creek gravel, roughened by years of minimal use. "Lonely is when you are surrounded by people but nobody sees you. Alone is when you choose your own company." "But Father says a man needs community," Daniel pressed. "He says a man needs to be part of something." Josiah paused then, the knife stilling in his hand. He looked at his grandson with eyes that had seen more than most men forget, pale blue, like ice melt, and just as clear. "Your father is right," he said. "That is why I am teaching you this." He held up the whistle, finished now, the wood still warm from his hands. Daniel took it, turning it over with the confusion of someone who expected a lesson but got a toy. "A whistle?" the boy asked. "A signal," Josiah corrected. "When you are lost, when you need help, you blow it. Someone who knows that sound will come. That is community. Not living in the same town, but answering when someone calls." Daniel blew into it experimentally. A clear, sharp note cut through the mountain air, echoing off the valley walls below. "Did someone ever call you Grandpa?" he asked. When you lived alone, Josiah's hand moved to his wrist without thinking, fingers tracing a scar there that looked like a rope burn, pale and old but permanent. Once he said quietly, "Summer of 1831. Hottest July I ever knew. I was 49, thought I had seen everything mountains could teach a man. Then I found her, found who, a woman dressed in black and white, tied to a tree with new rope. And that rope taught me more about duty than 20 years in the army ever did." The screen of the present faded like smoke, and the story pulled them both backward through the years to a time when the territory was still wild and justice was something men had to make for themselves. She was tied close enough to the ranch house to be seen from the road. That was the point. William Mercer wanted everyone to know she was dangerous. What he did not count on was someone who knew the difference between madness and terror. Josiah Brennan had been living in the Wind River Range for 5 years. When July of 1831 came around hot enough to make the pine sap run and the creek beds crack. His cabin sat at 8,000 feet, built from logs he had cut and chinked himself with pine tar and moss, positioned where he could see anyone coming from 3 miles away. He ran a trap line that covered 40 miles of wilderness, checking beaver sets and marten boxes in a circuit that took 3 days to complete. He came down to the valley 4, maybe 5 times a year, and that was 4 times more than he wanted. The mountains did not demand conversation. They did not ask questions about why a man lived alone or what he was running from. They just existed, indifferent and eternal, and that suited Josiah fine. But even mountain men need coffee and black powder, and that is what brought him down that July morning, leading a mule named Stubborn, who had earned his name honestly over 12 reliable years. The pack carried 40 beaver pelts, each one worth $6 if the trader was fair, and 4 if he was not. That was $240 if things went right enough for supplies to last him through another winter alone. He should have taken the East Trail. 8 miles, 3 hours, no complications. But the day was already hot by 6 in the morning, and the shortcut through Mercer Valley would save him an hour in the sun. That decision, that single choice to shave 60 minutes off a journey, would change everything. 5 years earlier, Josiah had been a different man. He had worn a uniform, then Army Scout, stationed at Fort Laramie, tracking hostile bands and mapping trails through Crow territory. He had been good at his work, good enough that they kept sending him out on longer patrols, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Sometimes a month in the wilderness with nothing but his rifle and his horse and the stars to navigate by. His wife Rachel used to say he was married to the mountains first and her second, but she said it with a smile that meant she understood. Their daughter Emma had his eyes and Rachel's practical nature, 9 years old, and already reading better than half the soldiers at the fort. They lived in officers' quarters, modest but solid, and Josiah told himself that his work kept them safe, that every hostile band he tracked was one less threat to his family. Winter of 1826 proved him wrong. He was 2 weeks into a patrol tracking a Crow raiding party that had hit a wagon train when the weather turned. Snow came early, and mean the kind that erases trails and makes every ridge look like every other ridge. By the time he made it back to Fort Laramie, 16 days after he had left, the cholera outbreak was over. The contaminated water supply had killed 23 people before the post surgeon figured out what was wrong. Rachel and Emma were graves number 7 and 8 in the military cemetery, buried side by side under a cottonwood tree that was already dropping its leaves. The fort chaplain handed him Rachel's last letter, written in the neat school teacher script she had learned back in Pennsylvania. Her hand had been shaking when she wrote it. He could see that in the way the letters wavered. Josiah, it said, do not blame yourself. You are doing your duty protecting others. But when you read this, remember that duty which keeps you from the people you love is not duty. It is fear wearing a uniform. Do not let my death make you hard. The world needs soft men who can be strong. Love always, Rachel. He had knelt between those two graves for 8 hours, not crying, not praying, just existing in the space where they should have been. When the sun went down, he stood up, walked to the commanding officer's quarters, and resigned his commission. The next morning, he walked into the mountains with his rifle, his knife, one blanket, and the certain knowledge that if he never cared about anyone again, he would never lose anyone again. 5 years of that certainty, 5 years of believing isolation was wisdom, brought him down the mountain trail that July morning with 40 beaver pelts and a mule who did not talk back. The first sign of trouble came at mile 5, where the trail descended into the foothills, and the pine forest gave way to scrub oak and juniper. Boot prints appeared in the dust, fresh enough that the edges were still sharp. Josiah stopped studying them with the automatic assessment of 2 decades tracking for the Army. 3 men, maybe 4. Heavy heel wear, which meant riders who walked their horses often, not farmers, not casual travelers. One set of prints had a distinctive notch in the right heel, like a nail had worn through the leather and been repaired poorly. That kind of detail mattered. That kind of detail could identify a man later if you needed to. The prince headed toward Mercer Land, deliberate and unhurried. Josiah's instinct said wrong, said turn back, said this is not your concern. But he had already come 5 miles and the day was only getting hotter. And besides, when had his instinct about people ever been right? It had not saved Rachel. It had not saved Emma. He kept walking. At mile 6, he smelled smoke. Not cooking fire, something else. Hay smoke maybe, or scorched wood. The kind of smell that comes from fire used as message rather than tool. The windmill on Mercer's property appeared on the horizon, creaking in the wind with a sound like old bones settling. And then the mule stopped. Stubborn had carried packs through blizzards and across rivers swollen with snowmelt. He had stood steady while wolves circled and mountain lions screamed from the rocks above. But now he stopped, ears forward, nostrils flared, reading something in the air that Josiah's duller human senses had not caught yet. Fear. The mule smelled fear. Josiah tied him to a juniper 200 yards back from the ridge upwind and out of sight. Then he approached on foot, using the cottonwood cover the way he had learned in the Army, placing each step with conscious thought, making himself part of the landscape rather than an intrusion upon it. From 50 yards away, he could see her. She sat with the archered back against a fallen cottonwood tree, positioned exactly where the main road curved past Mercer's property. The tree had fallen years ago, roots torn up like broken fingers, bark weathered gray, and she was tied to the trunk with rope that looked wrong even from a distance. Too yellow, too new, too clean. Josiah moved closer, using his training, observing before acting. She wore a nun's habit, black dress with white coif and wimple, the kind of clothing that marked a woman as untouchable, devoted to God, removed from the concerns of ordinary people. But someone had touched her. Someone had concerned themselves very much. The rope wrapped her waist 3 times, binding her to the tree trunk with deliberate care. Her hands were tied in front of her, not behind, which told Josiah this was about display, not restraint. If you wanted to prevent escape, you tied hands behind. If you wanted people to see what you had done, you tied them in front. Her face bore the evidence of recent violence. Left cheek bruised, the kind of purple that was maybe 12 hours old. Split lip with dried blood at the corner. Dirt on the white parts of her habit that suggested she had been dragged or thrown. But her eyes, when they swept the road watching for whoever might come, were not broken. They were angry. Boot prints circled the tree. Josiah counted 4 distinct sets. The men had paced while they worked, walking back and forth like people watching a show. One set had that notched heel he had seen on the trail. That meant at least one of the men who had done this had come from the direction Josiah had just traveled, maybe following the same route, maybe tracking him. The knots caught Josiah's attention. He had tied enough ropes in 20 years of army service to recognize technique when he saw it. The rope around her waist was secured with a bowline. The kind of knot sailors use, formed in seconds and holding firm under tension, but releasing easy when you knew the trick. The hitches securing the rope to the tree trunk were cavalry-style half hitches wrapped in a pattern he had seen 1,000 times at hitching posts and picket lines. Ranch hands did not tie knots like that. Ranch hands used whatever worked: quick overhand knots and clove hitches that held but looked messy. These knots were professional. These knots required training. And then there was the sign. A board leaned against the tree beside her hand, painted in black letters that were large enough to read from the road. It said dangerous, possessed, do not approach. Josiah understood the strategy immediately. Whoever had done this wanted her found, wanted her seen, wanted every person who passed by to think she was insane, dangerous demon, touched someone whose testimony about anything could not be trusted. It was elegant in a vicious kind of way. Kill a woman and she becomes a martyr. Tie her up and call her crazy and she becomes a cautionary tale. The ranch house sat 100 yards behind her doors, closed, no smoke from the chimney despite the hour. Too quiet. No chickens scratching in the yard. No dogs barking. Just the windmill creaking its rusty protest and the summer heat pressing down like a hand. Josiah stepped out of cover, moving slow, keeping his hands visible. The woman's eyes snapped to him immediately, sharp and assessing. She did not cry out, did not beg. Just watched him approach the way a trapped animal watches a predator, calculating odds, measuring intent. He stopped 10 feet away, removed his bearskin hat with the kind of deliberate formality that transcended words, and set it on the ground between them. Then he placed his canteen next to it, 3 feet from where she sat, close enough to reach, but far enough that he was not forcing anything on her. He stepped back 5 paces and waited. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the windmill and the wind moving through the dry grass. 20 seconds passed. 30. Josiah had learned in the mountains that silence was not empty. It was full of information if you knew how to listen. And this woman, he realized, was listening too. "You are going to leave," she said finally. Her voice was hoarse but steady, the kind of voice that came from someone who had already cried themselves dry. "Have not decided yet," Josiah replied. "Men like you do not get involved. Mountains are safer than people." That observation landed harder than she probably knew. Josiah felt something shift in his chest, recognition of a truth he had been hiding from. "You know mountain men?" he asked. "I know cowards," she said. "And wisdom? Sometimes they look the same." The sentence hit him like a rifle shot. This was not hysteria. This was not someone broken by fear. This was someone who had thought through every possibility, including the one where he walked away and left her to whatever came next. And she had already decided that his leaving would prove something about him, something he was not sure he wanted to admit was true. Josiah knelt beside the tree, not touching her yet, just yet examining. The rope was 3/4-inch manila hemp, the kind you bought at a general store for serious money. Not the hemp and sisal mix that ranches kept coiled on nails in the barn, frayed from weather and reuse. This was new. This was purchased specifically. He ran his finger along the fibers, feeling the texture, reading the story the rope told. "Less than 2 weeks old," he said aloud. "Bought in town, probably. Ranch rope would be weathered show wear. This is clean." The woman watched him. "Whoever tied you knows his knots," Josiah continued. "Navy or cavalry?" "Cavalry," she confirmed. "Captain William Mercer, retired. Though he prefers Mr. Mercer now that he owns half the valley." Josiah drew his Bowie knife, 12 inches of carbon steel that he kept sharp enough to split hairs. The woman flinched despite herself, an involuntary tightening around the eyes that told him she had been hurt recently, and hurt badly enough that reflexes were still raw. "I am cutting you loose," he said quietly. "Hold still." He worked the blade under the rope at the tree trunk, sawing through manila hemp that resisted like it had a grudge. The fibers fought him, evidence that whoever tied this had pulled it tight enough to mean it. When the first hitch gave way, he moved to the second, then the third, cutting methodically because there was no value in rushing and every value in doing it right. The rope fell away. Her arms dropped like dead weight, numb from position and circulation loss. She curled forward instinctively, both hands going to her midsection in a protective gesture that spoke to recent trauma, even if the details were not visible. Josiah stepped back immediately, hands open, giving her space. He did not offer to help her stand, did not reach out, just waited while she oriented herself to freedom, however temporary it might be. "What is your name?" he asked. "Sister Catherine," she said, then seemed to think better of the formality. "Catherine Moore." Josiah nodded once. "I'm Josiah Brennan." She was already looking past him toward the ranch house, fear flickering across her face like heat lightning on the horizon. "His name is William Mercer," she said. "This is his land?" Husband Josiah asked, though he already knew the answer from the habit she wore. She let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it had any humor in it. "I am a nun, Mr. Brennan. I have no husband. I have no property. Under territorial law, I have no legal standing to own anything or testify about anything without a male guardian's permission." "Then why did he tie you up?" "Because I saw something I should not have, and he needs everyone to believe I am insane before I can tell anyone what I saw." From the ranch house, a door opened. The creak of hinges carried in the still air, deliberate and performative. A man's voice called out loud enough to carry, carefully modulated, to sound concerned rather than threatening. "Sister Catherine, come back now. You are confused. We need to help you." Josiah recognized the tone immediately. It was not meant for Sister Catherine. It was meant for anyone who might be listening, anyone who might be watching. It was the tone of a reasonable man dealing with an unreasonable woman, establishing his narrative for public consumption. "Can you ride?" Josiah asked. "Can you run?" she countered. Josiah almost smiled. Whatever else this woman was, she had spine. He ran to where Stubborn was tied, untethered him, and led him back at a fast walk. Sister Catherine was already on her feet, swaying slightly, but standing. He did not ask permission, just shifted the beaver pelts to make a space, put his hands at her waist, and boosted her up onto the pack frame. Then he swung up behind her, taking the lead rope, and kicked Stubborn into the fastest pace the old mule could manage. They did not run. Mules do not run. But Stubborn moved with purpose, his long ears swiveling forward, as if he understood that sometimes you leave a place quick and ask questions later. Behind them, the ranch house stayed quiet. No pursuit, no shouting, just that creaking windmill and the sound of hooves on hard-packed earth. When they crested the ridge that put Mercer land out of sight, Josiah glanced back once. A man stood in front of the ranch house, now watching them go. He was too far away for Josiah to see his face, but close enough to see the gesture he made. A wave. Casual. Almost friendly. That wave told Josiah everything he needed to know. William Mercer was not chasing them because he did not need to. He had already planned for this. He knew where they would go. He knew what they would do. And he was confident enough to let them run because he believed the trap was already set. They rode in silence for 20 minutes. Sister Catherine gripping the pack frame, Josiah scanning the ridgeline behind them for signs of pursuit that never came. When he found a creek crossing in the foothills, spring-fed and cold, he pulled Stubborn to a stop. "We will water here," he said, sliding down and offering her a hand. "Then you tell me what you saw." The creek was narrow enough to step across, running clear over smooth stones that clicked and rattled under the current. Josiah let Stubborn drink, refilled both canteens with water so cold it hurt his teeth, and pulled a strip of elk jerky from his pack. He offered it to Sister Catherine without comment. She took it, bit off a piece, and chewed it slowly, methodically, like someone who had learned not to waste food. Her hands, Josiah noticed, were calloused, not the soft hands of someone who spent their days in prayer. These were working hands, the kind that came from labor and ledger keeping and practical tasks. "You are not much of a talker," she observed. "Mountains do not reward conversation. Josiah replied. I am not a mountain. He looked at her, then really looked, taking in the bruised face and the dirt-streaked habit and the rope burns on her wrist that she was trying not to favor. No, he said, but you have their patience. Most people found tied to a tree would still be crying. I cried yesterday, she said flatly. Used it up. Josiah pulled a small leather packet from his possibles bag, opened it to reveal a thick paste made from bear grease and yarrow root. He held it out wordlessly. Sister Catherine took it, sniffed once, and began applying it to the rope burns with the efficiency of someone who knew how to tend wounds. The silence between them felt different now, less wary, more like two people taking measure of each other and finding the weight acceptable. I live at St. Benedict's Convent, Sister Catherine said finally. 15 miles north of Cheyenne, 12 nuns. We farm 640 acres, run a small school for orphans. Big land, holding for a convent, Josiah observed. Spanish land grant from 1788. Originally belonged to a fur trader named Robert Moore. He deeded it to the Catholic Church in 1803, year he died. Josiah caught the detail, even though she had said it casually. Moore, that's your name too. Sister Catherine paused, entreating her wrists. It is now, she said. I was the orphan they found on the convent steps that year. Named me Catherine Moore after the month I was found. St. Catherine's feast day. Josiah's eyes narrowed. So you were found the same year the land was deeded, and you just happened to be named after the original owner. Sister Catherine met his gaze directly. I did not say it was an accident. The implications of that settled between them like dust. Josiah had seen enough of the world to know that coincidences were usually just conspiracies that had not been uncovered yet. If Sister Catherine was Robert Moore's daughter, then the land was not charity property. It was inheritance held in trust. And that changed everything about what William Mercer was trying to do. 3 months ago, Sister Catherine continued surveyors came through the valley. Railroad company planning a route from Omaha to the Pacific coast. The route they are scouting runs right through our land. Railroad needs water for steam engines, Josiah said. She nodded. Our land has the only spring-fed creek in 20 miles that runs year-round. Railroad surveyor told Mother Superior they would pay $50,000 for water rights. Josiah whistled low. That was serious money, the kind of money that made good men think twice and bad men not think at all. Average farm in Wyoming Territory, 160 acres, sold for maybe $800 if the land was decent. $50,000 was 62 farms worth of value in a single transaction. And Mercer wants that money, he said. Mercer is not just a rancher. He is an investor. He has bought up 12 properties in the last 2 years, all along the projected railroad route. He knows something, has inside information about where the route will go. Sister Catherine pulled a small leather pouch from inside her habit, the one Josiah had noticed earlier, hanging on a cord around her neck. She opened it carefully as if the contents were fragile, which perhaps they were in more than just the physical sense. William tried to buy our land 6 months ago, she said, offered $5,000. Mother Superior said no, told him the land is held in trust for the church, cannot be sold for private gain. Not her decision to make, even if she wanted to. So he decided to take it another way, Josiah said. Sister Catherine pulled out a folded piece of paper, aged and yellowed at the edges. 3 weeks ago, Mother Superior sent me to the county office in Cheyenne, just routine paperwork filing our annual tax exemption. The clerk was out to lunch. I waited, and while I waited, I looked through the public record books. She unfolded the paper carefully. It was covered in neat handwriting, the kind of precise script that came from someone who spent time with ledgers and documents. This is a copy of what I found in the land title records, she said. Transfer of Spanish land grant 447 from Catholic Church holdings to private trust, dated March 1828. Josiah studied the document. The handwriting was professional, the kind that clerks learned in school. Transaction looked official enough. Trust administrator was listed as William Mercer, and at the bottom a signature line that read, Mother Superior Agnes St. Benedict's Convent. What is the problem, he asked. Sister Catherine's voice went hard. The problem is Mother Superior Agnes never signed any transfer. In March of 1828, she was living at a convent in New Orleans. She did not arrive in Wyoming until 1829. That signature is forged. The pieces started falling into place. Josiah had seen enough fraud in his army years to recognize the shape of it. You copied this by hand, he said. I have a good memory for texts, Sister Catherine confirmed. I did not want to steal the original and give them grounds to arrest me for theft. So I copied it and brought it back to Mother Agnes and Father Wright. What did they say if Father Wright said, "We should go to the territorial judge immediately"? Show him the forgery file, a complaint, let the law handle it. But you did not, Josiah guessed. Sister Catherine looked away toward the creek water running over stones that had been there longer than any human claim to the land around them. I was afraid, she said quietly. I thought, what if we are wrong? What if there is an explanation I am not seeing? I wanted to be certain before we accused a man of fraud. She turned back to face him. That hesitation almost killed me, she said. Waiting for certainty is just another form of cowardice. Before Josiah could respond, she reached into the leather pouch again and pulled out a second document. This one was older, the paper foxed at the edges with age, the ink faded but still legible. She held it out to him. It was a birth certificate, Catholic Mission, Santa Fe, New Mexico Territory, issued April 1803. The entry read, Child Catherine Elizabeth Moore, born April 23, 1803. Mother Elizabeth Moore died in childbirth. Father Robert Moore, fur trader, Spanish land grant holder. Josiah's breath caught. You are not an abandoned orphan, he said slowly. You are the owner. My father died when I was 3 days old, Sister Catherine said. Consumption. My mother died giving birth to me. Father Dominguez brought me to St. Benedict's because my father had named the church as guardian in his will. But the land did not go to the church as charity. It went to me held in trust until I came of age. Did Mother Agnes know? She knew. She kept this certificate locked in her desk, planned to tell me when I turned 30. I found it 6 months ago when she asked me to fetch some papers. Josiah turned the implications over in his mind. If you are the owner, why cannot Mother Agnes just tell the court? Because I took vows, Sister Catherine said. Nuns cannot own property under church law. Everything we have belongs to the order. When I took vows at 21, I signed away any legal claim to inheritance. But if you renounced your vows, Josiah said, then I could claim the land. But renouncing vows takes church approval, takes time, takes a letter to the bishop in St. Louis in his response, which could be months. William does not have months. The railroad deal closes in 60 days. So he needs me either dead or certified insane before I can petition the church. The full shape of William Mercer's strategy became clear. Forge the land title to create paper ownership. Discredit the one person who could prove the forgery. Wait for the paperwork to be processed while the witness languished in an asylum or a grave. Sell the land to the railroad for $50,000. Split the money with whoever helped make it happen. It was methodical. It was clever. And it would have worked if Josiah had not happened to take the shortcut through Mercer Valley on a hot July morning. Why tie you to a tree, Josiah asked. Why not just keep you locked up quietly? Because he needs public consensus, Sister Catherine said. If I am found raving about conspiracies tied up for my own safety, then everyone agrees I am insane. The judge's order looks reasonable. My testimony gets dismissed not by law, but by community opinion. He is using social pressure as a legal weapon. Josiah examined the rope burns on her wrists more closely. These knots were not tied by Mercer, he said. His hands are too soft. I have seen him in town once or twice. These were tied by someone with calluses, someone who ties knots every day. Military man, Sister Catherine nodded. He has 3 hired men, all former cavalry from his unit. They would do anything for their former captain. Josiah stood, walked to the edge of the creek, and stared at his reflection in the water. Behind him, he could feel the Sister Catherine watching, waiting for him to make the decision he had been avoiding since the moment he cut that rope. He was 49 years old. He had spent 5 years telling himself that isolation was wisdom, that distance kept you safe, that if you never cared about anyone, you would never lose anyone. 5 years of believing the lie Rachel had warned him about in her final letter. Now here was a woman who needed help. Not rescue, he realized. She was plenty capable of that herself if she had had the chance. What she needed was a witness. Someone who could testify that she was not insane, that the rope was real, that the bruises were real, that William Mercer had staged the whole thing. Part of Josiah wanted to ride her to Sheriff Clayton in the territorial capital and then disappear back into the mountains. Let the law handle it. Not his problem, not his duty, not his fight. But he kept hearing Rachel's words. Duty that keeps you from the people you love is not duty, it is fear wearing a uniform. And he kept seeing Emma's grave. She had died while he was doing his duty elsewhere. Was Sister Catherine someone else's daughter, someone else's Emma? You are deciding whether to leave me at the edge of town and disappear, Sister Catherine said, breaking into his thoughts. Josiah did not turn around. Thinking about it, he admitted, I do not blame you. Smart man stays away from other people's wars. You seem to know a lot about smart men and cowards, Josiah said. You use those words a lot. Because I have been both, Sister Catherine replied quietly. That made him turn. How do you figure I knew about the forgery 3 weeks ago, she said. I could have gone straight to Sheriff Clayton. 40-mile ride, 2 days. I could have had him investigate arrest. William solved this legally. So why did you not? Because I was afraid. I thought, what if I am wrong? What if I misread the signature? What if I caused trouble for no reason? I waited for Father Wright to handle it, waited for someone older, someone male, someone with authority. She looked at her rope-burned wrists. Then they came for me, tied me to that tree, and I realized there is no someone else. There is only the person who happens to be standing there when evil walks in. And I waited too long. The silence that followed had weight. Josiah felt it pressing against his chest, felt it working its way into the cracks in the armor he had built over 5 years of solitude. My father used to say, Sister Catherine continued, well, the nuns told me he used to say, courage is not the absence of fear. It is deciding that something else matters more than your fear. He died taking care of me, died from consumption he caught keeping me warm that first winter. She stood, walked over to face him directly. I am not asking you to save me, Mr. Brennan. I am asking you to stand witness, that is all. Be the person who saw what William did. Be the person who can testify that the rope was real, that the bruises were real, that I am not crazy. And if Mercer tries to kill us both, Josiah asked, then at least someone tried. At least someone stood up. Better than dying alone in a mountain cabin, wondering if you could have mattered. The sentence hit him like a physical blow. She was right. He had been dying alone in that cabin, slowly, safely, comfortably, but still dying. Dying the way men do when they confuse existence with living. Josiah walked to stubborn, checked the pack saddle, pulled a blanket from his gear. Sister Catherine tensed, thinking perhaps that he was preparing to leave her there, that the conversation had been his way of letting her down gently. Instead, he brought the blanket to her and draped it over her shoulders. Evening was coming, and with it, the mountain cold that people from the flatlands never quite believed until they felt it. We will ride to town at first light, he said, but we are not dropping you at the edge and running. Sister Catherine's eyes widened slightly. What are you going to do? What I do best, Josiah said. Track, watch, wait for them to make a mistake. And when they do, we stand there when evil walks in. Something that might have been hope flickered across her face. Something like that, she asked. Something exactly like that, Josiah confirmed. He turned to set up a cold camp, no fire, to give away their position, and that is when he saw them. Fresh tracks in the creek mud, horse tracks that had not been there when they arrived. Someone had crossed here within the last hour. Someone had been close enough to hear every word of their conversation, and there, pressed deep into the soft earth, was that distinctive notched heel print. Josiah's blood went cold. They had not been alone. Someone had followed them from Mercer's property, had listened, while Sister Catherine told her story, had heard about the birth certificate and the forged land title, and the plan to get Sheriff Clayton involved. Now that someone was riding back to tell William Mercer everything. He kept his face neutral, did not want to panic Sister Catherine, but his mind was already working through the implications. William had let them go deliberately. He wanted to know where Sister Catherine would run, who she would talk to, what proof she had. Now he knew. Now he had all night to prepare his countermove. We have company out there, Josiah said quietly, pointing to the tracks. Maybe a mile back, watching. Sister Catherine went pale. Will they attack? No, Josiah said. They will watch. They will follow. And tomorrow when we ride into town, William will be waiting with his own story. And his story will sound better than ours because he has had all night to plan it. So what do we do? Sister Catherine asked. Josiah loaded his Hawken rifle, the .54 caliber that he had carried through more fights than he cared to remember. The rifle was old but reliable, accurate, out to 200 yards in the hands of someone who knew what they were doing, and Josiah had been doing this since before Sister Catherine was born. We beat him to the story, Josiah said. We ride hard at first light, and we make sure the whole town sees us arrive before he can poison the well. He found a spot under a rock overhang where they could sleep with stone at their backs and a clear view of the approach. Sister Catherine curled up in the blanket he had given her, exhausted, beyond the point of pretending otherwise. Josiah sat with his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness, listening to the night sounds that told him more than his eyes ever could. Somewhere out there, a man with a notched heel was writing back to William Mercer with everything he had learned. Somewhere in Cheyenne, papers were being prepared, stories were being crafted, traps were being set. And come morning, Josiah Brennan would walk right into them, not because he was brave, but because he had finally understood what Rachel meant when she said the world needed soft men who could be strong. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, marking time the way they had for thousands of years before this night and would for thousands more after. But for Josiah, watching over a sleeping nun who happened to be a landowner that someone wanted erased, the stars felt like witnesses, silent, distant, but there, and sometimes he thought that is all courage really was, being there when someone needed a witness, standing up when it would be easier to walk away, answering the call even when you had spent 5 years telling yourself you would never answer anything again. The whistle he had carved for his grandson would make that same clear note, carrying across valleys, calling for help, trusting that someone who heard would come. Community was not living in the same place. It was answering when someone called. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight, for the first time in 5 years, Josiah Brennan felt like he was part of something larger than his own carefully maintained isolation. And if that feeling came with danger, with risk, with the possibility of loss, well, Rachel would have said that is what living always required. The night deepened, the stars turned, and Josiah kept watch, one hand on his rifle, ready for whatever dawn would bring. Dawn came the way it always did in the mountains, slow and cold, the sun taking its time to climb over the ridges, as if reluctant to see what the day might bring. Josiah had been awake for an hour already, watching the darkness thin into gray, listening to the sounds that told him they were still alone. Sister Catherine stirred as the first direct sunlight touched her face, waking with the instant alertness of someone who had learned to sleep light. "No fire," Josiah said quietly, seeing her look toward where a fire should have been. "Cannot risk the smoke. We will eat while we ride." She nodded, accepting this without complaint, which told him more about her practical nature than an hour of conversation would have. He handed her a piece of dried venison and one of the hard biscuits he kept wrapped in oilcloth, food that would sit heavy in the stomach and last through a hard day. They were on, stubborn and moving before the sun cleared the peaks, Josiah setting a pace that was faster than the mule preferred, but slower than panic. They had 8 miles to cover before they reached Cheyenne, and every minute counted now. William Mercer had all night to prepare his story. The only advantage Josiah and Sister Catherine had was a rival being seen in town before William could control the narrative. The trail descended through pine forest that smelled of sap and old needles, then into the scrub oak foothills, where the trees gave way to sage and rabbit brush. Josiah kept his eyes moving, scanning the ridge lines behind them for signs of pursuit, checking the trail ahead for ambush points. Old habits from Army days, the kind of vigilance that had kept him alive through 20 years of Indian country. Sister Catherine sat in front of him on the pack frame, not speaking, but he could feel the tension in her shoulders every time the trail bent or the vegetation thickened enough to hide a man. She was thinking about what came next, about walking into a town where William Mercer had already spent the night building his version of events. "Tell me about the town," Josiah said. "Who matters there?" Sister Catherine shifted slightly, considering. "Father Wright at St. Mary's Church," she said. "He is old, maybe 67, but people respect him. German immigrant, fought in some war back in Europe before he took vows. He does not back down." Josiah filed that away. A priest with combat experience was worth knowing about. Who else? Ellen Harper runs the general store. Widow, been there 15 years. She keeps the best ledgers in the territory, remembers every transaction. If anyone bought that rope, she will know. "What about the law?" "Deputy Frank Blake's," Sister Catherine said, and something in her voice made Josiah pay attention. "He is young, maybe 32. William has something on him. I do not know what, but I saw Blake's face when Father Wright showed him that forged document. He knew it was fraud and he was scared. Scared of Mercer or scared of being caught? Josiah asked. Both, probably. Blake is not a bad man. He is a weak one. There is a difference. They rode in silence for another mile, the town coming into view below them, a collection of wooden buildings arranged along a single main street, each with a few side roads branching off like ribs. Smoke rose from morning fires, and Josiah could see people beginning to move around, starting their day but unaware that it was about to get complicated. At the edge of town where the trail widened into a proper road, Josiah pulled Stubborn to a stop. He could see the sheriff's office from here, a squat building with barred windows and a faded sign. And standing on the boardwalk in front of it, arms crossed, watching the road like he had been expecting them, was Deputy Frank Blake. "He is waiting for us," Sister Catherine said quietly. Josiah studied the deputy. Blake was young, as Sister Catherine had said, with the kind of face that wanted to be kind, but had not quite figured out how. He wore his badge pinned to a vest that had seen better days, and his hand rested near his gun, but not on it. Nervous but not aggressive. A man following orders he did not quite believe in. Behind Blake, farther down the street, Josiah could see other men beginning to gather. Word had spread fast. In a town this size, a nun returning with a strange mountain man, after being reported missing, was the kind of event that drew a crowd. And standing in front of the hotel, perfectly positioned to be seen by everyone, was William Mercer. He was younger than Josiah had expected, maybe 38, with the kind of groomed appearance that came from money and the kind of straight-backed posture that came from cavalry training. He wore a dark suit that would have looked at home in St. Louis, and his face bore an expression of patient concern that Josiah recognized immediately. This was a man who had practiced looking trustworthy. "We ride straight to Blake," Josiah said. "Do not look at Mercer. Do not acknowledge him. We deal with the badge first." They moved forward at a walk, Stubborn's hooves clopping on the hard-packed street, the sound loud in the morning quiet. People stopped what they were doing to watch. A woman with a basket paused mid-step. Two men outside the saloon straightened up. A boy leading a horse to the livery stable froze, staring. Deputy Blake stepped off the boardwalk as they approached, his hand moving closer to his gun. "Morning," he said, his voice carrying that forced casualness that lawmen used when they wanted to appear in control. "Sister Catherine, Mr. Brennan, we have been looking for you." Josiah did not dismount. He stayed on Stubborn, keeping the height advantage, keeping his options open. "Found her tied to a tree on Mercer land," he said. "Figured she needed help." Blake's eyes flicked to Sister Catherine, taking in the bruised face, the dirt-streaked habit, the rope burns on her wrists that were impossible to hide. Something passed across his face, too quick to read, but too real to be fake. Guilt, maybe. Or recognition. "Mr. Mercer filed a complaint yesterday evening," Blake said, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Says Sister Catherine has been having the episodes. Religious delusions, paranoid ideation. Judge Morrison issued an order for protective custody." He held the paper up so people could see the official seal, the signature, the weight of law made visible. Josiah recognized the move. Blake was building his public defense, showing everyone that he was following proper procedure. "Let me see that," Josiah said. Blake hesitated, then handed it up. Josiah unfolded the document, reading carefully. The legal language was dense but clear enough. The order claimed Sister Catherine posed a danger to herself due to mental instability, authorized Deputy Blake to take her into protective custody, specified she was to be held at the county facility until a proper psychiatric evaluation could be arranged. It was thorough, it was official, and if you did not know the context, it would look entirely reasonable. "Judge Morrison," Josiah said. "That is Mercer's uncle, is it not?" Blake's jaw tightened. "Judge Morrison is a territorial judge," he said. "What he is to Mr. Mercer does not change the law." Sister Catherine spoke, then, her voice clear and steady, pitched to carry to the gathering crowd. "I am not insane, Deputy Blake. I witnessed a crime, and William Mercer is trying to silence me before I can testify." Blake looked uncomfortable. "That is exactly what someone having delusions would say, sister." "Then look at my face," Sister Catherine said. "Look at my wrists. Do those look like self-inflicted injuries?" "You could have struggled," Blake said, but his heart was not in it. "You could have hurt yourself trying to get loose." From the crowd, a woman's voice called out. "What was she tied with?" Josiah answered before Blake could. "New rope purchased from a store. The knots are cavalry style, professional work. That is quite an accusation, Blake said. It is quite a rope, Josiah replied. Still on Mercer's property if you want to verify. William Mercer chose that moment to step forward, moving through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who owned half of everything they were standing on. He smiled sadly the way you would smile at a sick relative who did not know they were sick. Sister Catherine, he said gently, I am glad you are safe. We were all very worried. Sister Catherine's hands clenched on the pack frame. Do not pretend to care about my safety, William. You are the one who had me tied up. Mercer's expression shifted to pained patience. This is exactly what Father Wright and I have been concerned about. These paranoid accusations, these delusions of persecution. He looked at the crowd, including them in his performance. Sister Catherine has been under tremendous stress, the responsibility of managing the convent records, the isolation, the pressure. It has affected her mind. That is a lie, Sister Catherine said. A woman in the crowd murmured something about convents and hysteria. A man said something about women and religious mania. Josiah felt the mood shifting, felt William's narrative taking root. She found your land fraud, Josiah said flatly, cutting through the murmur. Found the forged title transfer in the county records. That is why you needed her discredited. The street went quiet. William's smile did not waver, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. That is a serious accusation, Mr. Brennan. Based on what evidence? Based on the fact that she was tied to a tree on your property, Josiah said. Based on her face looking like someone hit her. Based on new rope that had to be purchased from town. Blake stepped forward. Mr. Brennan, I am going to need you to step down from that mule and let me take Sister Catherine into custody. Judge's orders. Josiah did not move. He had been in enough standoffs to know how they worked. The first person to flinch lost. The first person to show uncertainty gave the other side the opening they needed. No, he said simply. That is obstruction. Blake said, his hand moving to his gun now. That is justice, Josiah replied. You take her into custody and she disappears into some county facility where Mercer can control who sees her and what gets written down. You know that is what will happen, Blake. I can see it in your face. Blake's hand hovered near his gun, not drawing but not backing down either. The crowd pressed closer, sensing violence, wanting to see how it would play out. Josiah could feel Sister Catherine's breathing shallow and quick, could feel her fear mixing with defiance. And then Josiah did something that changed everything. He drew his revolver in one smooth motion, a .36 caliber Navy Colt that he had carried since his Army days, and pointed it straight up at the sky. Everyone froze. Blake's hand stopped moving. The crowd held his collective breath. Josiah fired once. The shot cracked across the street like thunder, echoing off the building fronts, making horses jump and dogs bark, and every person in earshot flinch. The echo faded slowly, rolling away into the foothills, leaving a silence so complete that Josiah could hear the creak of the hotel signs swinging in the wind. He lowered the gun and rested it back in his holster, never taking his eyes off Blake. Everybody back, Josiah said, his voice carrying in the shocked quiet. Nobody is getting dragged anywhere until Sheriff Clayton gets here to sort this out proper. Blake stared at him. You just assaulted an officer. I fired into the air, Josiah said. Did not point it at anyone. Did not threaten anyone. Just made sure I had your attention. William Mercer's voice cut in sharp now, the false gentleness gone. You just made this a lot worse for yourself, Brennan. Maybe, Josiah said. Or maybe I stopped it from getting stupid. From somewhere in the crowd, an old man's voice spoke up. That paper does not say he gets to tie nuns to trees. Another voice, a woman this time. Let her talk. Let us hear what she has to say. The crowd was shifting again, uncertain now. The gunshot had broken William's narrative momentum. People were asking questions instead of nodding along. Blake looked from Josiah to William to the crowd, trying to figure out which way to jump. Sister Catherine spoke into the uncertainty, her voice steady. I want to show something. To everyone. She pulled out the leather pouch from inside her habit, removed the birth certificate, and held it up high enough for people to see. This is my birth certificate, she said. Catherine Elizabeth Moore, born April 1803. Daughter of Robert Moore, holder of Spanish land grant 447. A murmur ran through the crowd. People knew that land grant. Everyone in the territory knew about the convent property and its water rights. My father deeded that land to the church as trust for me, Sister Catherine continued. Not as charity, as inheritance. And 3 weeks ago, I found a forged document in the county records transferring that land to William Mercer's private trust. That is theft of county property, Blake said quickly. You are proving Mr. Mercer's point that you have been acting irrationally. Or I am proving he is a fraud, Sister Catherine shot back. William held up his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. This is tragic, he said. A woman so disturbed that she is now fabricating elaborate conspiracies. Deputy Blake, I insist you take her into protective custody before she hurts herself or makes these accusations any worse. Blake reached for Sister Catherine's arm. Josiah moved stubborn between them, not threatening but blocking. Blake's hand fell away. From the back of the crowd, a new voice spoke. Strong female with the kind of authority that came from 15 years of being the person everyone owed money to. I would like to see that birth certificate. The crowd parted. Ellen Harper walked through gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a practical dress and an apron that bore the stains of a long morning's work. She was 50-something, with a face that had forgotten how to smile, but remembered how to see through lies. Sister Catherine handed the certificate down to her. Ellen examined it carefully, holding it up to the light, checking the paper quality, the ink color, the seal at the bottom. This is real, Ellen said flatly. Spanish mission paper from New Mexico territory. I have seen enough of these to know authentic when I see it. She looked up at Sister Catherine. Your father was Robert Moore. I remember him. He used to trade here back in 1803 year I arrived. Good man. Died of consumption that winter. Then you know the land is mine, Sister Catherine said. Ellen looked at William. I also know that forging land titles is a hanging offense in this territory. William's face remained calm, but Josiah saw the tension in his shoulders. You are taking the word of an unstable woman over properly filed county documents. I am taking the word of a birth certificate over paperwork that suddenly appeared 3 years ago, Ellen said. And I am remembering that 8 years ago, another nun went missing on your property. The crowd went dead silent. Josiah felt the hairs on his neck stand up. This was new information, something neither he nor Sister Catherine had mentioned. What are you talking about? Sister Catherine asked, her voice shaking. Ellen's face was grim. Sister Margaret, summer of 1823. She was investigating land irregularities, same as you. Went missing one night. They found her habit by the river. Never found her body. Sister Catherine went white. Margaret was my teacher, she whispered. They told me she drowned. They told everyone she drowned, Ellen said. But I am Margaret's sister, and I never believed it. The revelation hit like a second gunshot. Josiah watched William's face, saw the micro-expression that passed across it. Not surprise, not shock, just a quick calculation of how to respond to a truth he had thought was safely buried. That is a vicious lie, William said. My family helped with the search for Sister Margaret. We spent days looking for her. You spent days making sure no one looked too closely at your property, Ellen corrected. And now here is another nun investigating another land fraud tied up on the same ground. Deputy Blake's hand had moved away from his gun entirely. He was looking at William now with something that might have been doubt, or might have been the beginning of understanding that he had been on the wrong side. Blake, William said sharply, arrest Harper for slander and take Sister Catherine into custody. Now, Blake did not move. His face was working through something, some internal calculation that Josiah recognized. This was the moment, the point where a weak man had to decide whether to stay weak or find whatever strength he had. Blake looked at Josiah, then at Sister Catherine, then at Ellen. I need to see that forged document, he said slowly. The one Sister Catherine says she found in the county records. Sister Catherine pulled out her handwritten copy, handed it down. Blake read it, his lips moving slightly, his face growing paler with each line. This shows Mother Agnes signing over the land in March 1828, Blake said. She was in New Orleans then, Sister Catherine said. Did not arrive here until 1829. That signature is false, Blake looked at William. Did you know about this? Of course not, William said smoothly. This is clearly a misunderstanding. Some clerk's error, easily explained once we can examine the actual records. Then let us go examine them, Ellen said. Right now, all of us. Walk down to the county office and pull that ledger. William's smile tightened. The office does not open until 9 o'clock. It is 8:45, Ellen said. We can wait. The crowd was firmly on Sister Catherine's side now. Josiah could feel it in the way people positioned themselves, creating a loose circle that included him and Sister Catherine and Ellen, but excluded William and Blake. Public opinion was a powerful thing in a small town, and William was losing it. Fine, William said. We will all go to the county office. And when we prove that Sister Catherine has been confused, I expect apologies. And arrests. They moved as a group down the street, 40 or 50 people drawn by drama and the possibility of scandal. Josiah helped Sister Catherine down from stubborn, tied the mule to a hitching post, and positioned himself beside her. Ellen walked on her other side, creating a barrier between Sister Catherine and William. The county office was a two-story building that served as courthouse records office and general administrative center for the territory. Martin Hayes, the county clerk, stood on the steps smoking a cigarette, watching the approaching crowd with the expression of a man who knew something had gone terribly wrong. Morning, Martin, Ellen called out. We need to see the land title records. Hayes' cigarette stopped halfway to his mouth. The office does not open for another 10 minutes. Open it now, Ellen said. Hayes looked past her to William, and Josiah saw the exchange clear as daylight. Hayes asking with his eyes what to do. William giving a slight shake of his head. Hayes swallowing hard trap between the crowd and his own conscience. I do not have the keys, Hayes said. Left them inside. You are standing outside smoking. Ellen pointed out. How did you get out here without keys? Hayes' face reddened. He took a drag of his cigarette, thinking fast. Look, he said, I can open the office, but I cannot show you records without proper authorization. You need a judge's order. Sister Catherine has authorization, Ellen said. It is her land. She is under psychiatric observation order. Hayes protested weakly. She is standing right here, not drooling or raving. Ellen snapped. Open the damn office, Martin. The crowd murmured agreement. Hayes looked at William again, but this time William was looking at the crowd, calculating odds, realizing that forcing Hayes to obstruct would only make things worse. Open it, William said quietly. Let us settle this now. Hayes fumbled with his keys, dropped them once, finally got the door unlocked. The inside of the office smelled like old paper and tobacco and something else. Fear, maybe, or guilt. The kind of smell that accumulated in places where men made decisions they could not take back. The land title ledgers were kept in a locked cabinet behind Hayes' desk. He opened it with shaking hands, pulled out a heavy leather-bound volume, and set it on the desk with a thump that raised dust. Spanish land grant. 447, Ellen said. Find it. Hayes flipped pages, his fingers leaving sweat marks on the paper. He found the entry, then stopped, his face going ashen. What is wrong? Blake asked, stepping closer. Hayes did not answer. He just stared at the page. Josiah moved around the desk to look. The entry was there just as Sister Catherine had described. Transfer from Catholic Church Holdings to Private Trust dated March 1828, signed by Mother Superior Agnes. The handwriting was professional, the kind that clerks learned in school. But something was wrong with it. Josiah had spent enough time reading Army reports to know what forged documents looked like. The ink color was slightly different from the entries above and below it. The paper had been scraped, evidence of an erasure underneath. And the signature, when you looked close, showed hesitation marks. Someone had traced it slowly, carefully, trying to match handwriting they did not own. This is forged, Josiah said flatly. You can see where the original entry was erased and rewritten. Hayes' hands were shaking. I did not do it, he said quickly. I did not write that. But you knew about it, Blake said, his voice hard now. You knew, and you did not report it. Hayes looked at William with something that might have been hatred or might have been terror. He said he would ruin me, Hayes whispered. Said he would tell everyone about the money. What money? Blake asked. Hayes slumped against the desk. 3 years ago, I borrowed funds from the county treasury. Just for a month, I swear. Had a debt, needed to pay it. Was going to put it back. But William found out. Said if I did not help him with the land transfer, he would report me. I would hang for embezzlement. So you helped him forge the land title, Ellen said. I just let him into the office, Hayes said miserably, late at night when no one was here. He did the writing himself. I just looked the other way. Sister Catherine stepped forward. And when I came to file our tax exemption, you were afraid I would notice. That is why you reported me to William. Hayes nodded, not meeting her eyes. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Blake stood with his hand on the ledger, staring at the forged entry like it was a snake that might strike. His face was going through a complicated set of emotions, and Josiah could see the moment when the deputy made his choice. Blake pulled the badge off his vest and set it on the desk. "What are you doing?" William asked sharply. "What I should have done weeks ago," Blake said. "I am not going to arrest innocent people to cover up fraud." "Not anymore." He looked at Sister Catherine. "I am sorry. I knew something was wrong. I should have said something sooner." Sister Catherine nodded once, accepting the apology without comment. Blake was weak, but he was not cruel. That counted for something. William's facade cracked then. The patient expression disappeared, replaced by cold anger. "You are all making a mistake," he said. "This is not over. I have lawyers. I have Judge Morrison's backing. I have resources you cannot match." "You had Hayes's silence," Ellen said. "You had Blake's weakness. You had a murdered nun that everyone forgot about, but you do not have any of those things anymore." William's hand moved toward his coat pocket. Josiah's hand moved faster, dropping to his revolver grip without drawing. The motion was small but unmistakable. William froze. "Do not," Josiah said quietly. William's hand moved away from his pocket, empty. He looked at Josiah with the kind of hatred that came from having a plan unravel. "You are going to regret this, mountain man," maybe Josiah said, "but at least I will be able to sleep." Blake cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer, I am placing you under citizen's arrest for fraud and conspiracy. Real sheriff can sort it out when he arrives." "I want to see Judge Morrison," William said. "Judge Morrison is 2 days' ride away," Ellen said. "And when Sheriff Clayton gets here tomorrow, I suspect he will have some questions for the judge too." William looked around the room, seeing his support evaporate, seeing the crowd's faces turned against him. He straightened his coat with careful dignity, clinging to the appearance of control, even as it slipped through his fingers. "This is not finished," he said. But everyone in the room knew it was. The forgery was exposed. The clerk had confessed. The missing nun from 8 years ago was remembered. The evidence was visible. And most importantly, the town had seen what William Mercer really was. They walked William to the jail cells at the back of the sheriff's office, Blake leading Hayes following with his head down, the crowd trailing behind like witnesses to a funeral. Josiah stayed with Sister Catherine, watching her process what had just happened, seeing the tension slowly drain from her shoulders. "You did it," Josiah said quietly. "We did it," Sister Catherine corrected. "I could not have survived without you. You would have found another way." She smiled, small but real. "Maybe, but I am glad it was you." Ellen Harper approached them, her stern face softening just slightly. "I need to talk to you, sister, about Margaret." Sister Catherine took Ellen's hand. "Tell me about her." They sat on the bench outside the sheriff's office, and Ellen told the story. How Margaret had been investigating land claims, how she had found discrepancies in the county maps, how she had mentioned William Mercer's name in her letters home, how she had gone missing on a moonless night in August, and how they had found her habit by the river the next morning, how the search party led by William's men had concluded she had drowned, how Ellen had never believed it but had no proof, no evidence, just a sister's certainty that something was wrong. "I should have pushed harder," Ellen said. "Should have made them keep looking, but I was younger then. Did not have the standing I have now. Did not know how to fight men who owned everything." "You are fighting now," Sister Catherine said. "That is what matters." Ellen looked at her. "You are like Margaret, you know. Same stubbornness, same courage. Just try not to disappear like she did." Josiah watched the town settling back into normalcy, people returning to their work, the drama fading into routine. But he knew this was not over. William Mercer might be in a cell, but he had connections. He had money. He had an uncle who was a territorial judge. The fight had just changed shape, not ended. Blake came out of the office looking diminished, without his badge, but somehow more solid for it. "Sister Catherine," he said, "I need to ask you something. That birth certificate, when you came of age, did Mother Agnes tell you about it?" "She found it herself," Josiah said. 6 months ago," Blake nodded slowly. "And you did not renounce your vows, did not try to claim the land?" Sister Catherine shook her head. "I did not know I needed to. I thought the land belonged to the church. I thought I was just helping manage property that was not mine. But now you know," Blake said. "What are you going to do?" Sister Catherine looked at Josiah, then at Ellen, then at the people moving through the street, going about their lives. "I do not know yet," she said. The land is not just property, it is home to 12 nuns and 20 orphans. It is a school and a farm and a life that matters to people. I cannot just claim it for myself. But you have to, Ellen said. If you do not, the railroad will find another William Mercer, another scheme, another forged paper. You have to claim it and protect it proper. I am a nun, Sister Catherine protested. I cannot own property. Then stop being a nun, Ellen said bluntly. Write to the bishop. Renounce your vows. Claim your inheritance. Make sure what your father built does not get stolen by men who see everything as money. The weight of that settled over Sister Catherine like a physical thing. Josiah watched her face work through the implications. Giving up her vows meant giving up the only identity she had ever known. But keeping them meant losing the land that was rightfully hers and watching it fall into hands that would destroy everything her father had intended. I need time, she said finally. Time to think. Time to pray. You have got until Sheriff Clayton arrives, Blake said. Then this becomes official court business. And courts do not wait for prayers. They disperse slowly. Ellen returning to her, Store Blake to the sheriff's office to stand guard over William and Hayes, the crowd to their various businesses. Josiah and Sister Catherine stood in the street, exhausted but alive, having survived the first battle of what promised to be a longer war. I should take you to the church, Josiah said. Father Wright needs to know what happened. They walked to St. Mary's, a modest building with a small bell tower and windows of plain glass. Father Wright met them at the door, his face showing relief and worry in equal measure. Thank God, he said, taking Sister Catherine's hands. We have been praying all night. Mother Agnes sent word that you were taken. I was, Sister Catherine said, but Josiah found me. Father Wright looked at Josiah with the assessing gaze of a man who had seen combat in his youth and never forgotten how to recognize a soldier. Thank you, he said simply. Do not thank me yet, Josiah replied. The hard part is coming. They sat in the small rectory behind the church, and Sister Catherine told Father Wright everything. The forgery, the birth certificate, William's arrest, Ellen's revelation about Sister Margaret, the choice that now lay before her. Father Wright listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Your father, he said finally, was a good man. I met him once, long before you were born. He came to the mission in Santa Fe seeking absolution for something. He never told me what, but I remember him saying that land was not about ownership. It was about stewardship, about protecting something for those who came after. So you think I should claim it, Sister Catherine said. I think you should do what your conscience requires, Father Wright replied. The church will understand either way. Your vows were made in good faith before you knew your history. If you choose to renounce them to protect your father's legacy, that is not a sin. That is answering a different kind of calling. Josiah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street. Movement caught his eye. 3 riders coming into town from the north. Cavalry posture. Military bearing. William's men. We have got company, he said quietly. Father Wright and Sister Catherine joined him at the window. The riders stopped in front of the hotel, dismounted, tied their horses. They wore civilian clothes, but everything about them screamed military. The way they moved, the way they scanned the street, the way they positioned themselves with overlapping fields of view. Those are William's hired men, Sister Catherine said, the ones who tied me to the tree. Josiah studied them. 3 against 1 were not good odds. 3 trained cavalry against 1 former scout were worse odds, but he had faced worse and lived. Stay here, he said. Both of you, lock the door. Do not come out until I come back. You cannot face them alone, Father Wright protested. I will not be alone, Josiah said. I will be the one they are not expecting to fight back. He walked out into the street, his hand loose at his side near his revolver. The 3 men saw him coming and spread out slightly, a practiced movement that spoke to years of working together. The one in the middle, the one with those big knuckled hands, Sister Catherine had described, smiled without warmth. You are the mountain man, he said, the one who cut her loose. Josiah did not answer. He just kept walking until he was close enough to see their eyes close enough to make any first move count. Captain wants to talk to you, the man said. Your captain is in a jail cell, Josiah replied. For now, the man agreed. But things change. Charges get dropped. Witnesses get confused. Papers get lost. Happens all the time. Not this time, Josiah said. The man's smile widened. You do not know how this works, do you? Men like the captain, they do not lose. They have got money. They have got connections. They have got us. You had Hayes's silence in Blake's weakness, Josiah said. Do not have those anymore. We have got other things, the man said. He nodded to his companions. We know where Sister Catherine is sleeping tonight. Know where that store owner lives. Know where you will be when you think you are safe. The threat hung in the air, clear and unmistakable. Josiah had heard threats before enough to know which ones were real and which ones were performance. This was real. You touch any of them, Josiah said quietly, and I will track each of you into whatever hole you crawl into. I will find you, and you will not see me coming. The man laughed. Big words from one man. I am not one man, Josiah said. I am the one man who knows these mountains better than you know your own horse. I am the one man who tracked Crow war parties for 20 years and lived to tell about it. You want to make this about numbers? Fine. But remember that in the mountains at night alone, numbers do not mean much. The silence stretched. The three men looked at each other, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then the leader shrugged. Just delivering a message, he said. What you do with it is your business. They walked back to their horses, mounted and rode out of town. But slowly, deliberately, making sure Josiah saw that they were not running. They were choosing to leave. The distinction mattered to men like them. Josiah waited until they were out of sight, then went back to the church. Father Wright and Sister Catherine were standing just inside the door, having watched the whole thing. They will be back, Father Wright said. I know, Josiah replied, but not tonight. Tonight they are reporting to William, telling him what happened, waiting for instructions. What do we do? Sister Catherine asked. We wait for Sheriff Clayton, Josiah said. He is due tomorrow morning. Once he is here, this becomes official. Becomes harder for William to make things disappear. And until then, Father Wright asked. Until then, Josiah said, we make sure you are not alone. All of you, anyone William might target. We stay together where people can see us. They spent that afternoon organizing. Ellen Harper closed her store and moved into the church rectory. Blake, still badgeless but determined, stayed at the sheriff's office guarding the prisoners. Tom Warren, the young man from the livery who had seen William by the rope, came to the church with his father, both of them armed with old rifles and the kind of stubborn courage that came from knowing you were on the right side. By sunset, St. Mary's Church had become a fortress. Not a military one, but something more important. A community one. People who had decided that whatever came next, they would face it together. Josiah sat on the church steps as darkness fell, his rifle across his knees, watching the street. Sister Catherine came out and sat beside him. Thank you, she said, for everything. Thank you for reminding me why it matters, Josiah replied. They sat in companionable silence as the stars came out bright and clear in the mountain air. Tomorrow would bring Sheriff Clayton. Tomorrow would bring justice, or at least the beginning of it. Tomorrow would bring whatever William Mercer's lawyers and connections and money could throw at them. But tonight they were alive. They were together. And they had proven that sometimes when enough people decided to stand up, even the most carefully laid plans could unravel. In the distance, a coyote called. Another answered. The wind moved through the cottonwoods with a sound like water. And Josiah Brennan, mountain man and former soldier and reluctant hero, felt something he had not felt in 5 years. Hope. Sheriff John Clayton arrived with the sunrise, riding a bay mare that had seen as many miles as he had, which was considerable. He was 55 years old, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite that made up the mountains weathered by wind and sun in 30 years of dealing with men at their worst. He wore his badge without ceremony pinned to a leather vest that had stopped being new sometime during the previous decade, and he carried a Winchester rifle in a saddle scabbard that showed the wear of frequent use. Josiah saw him coming from his position on the church steps, where he had spent most of the night keeping watch. There was something in the way Clayton sat his horse, the way he scanned the street before entering it, that marked him as a man who had survived by being careful. Former cavalry, Josiah guessed, probably saw action in the Indian campaigns. The kind of lawman who understood that a badge was just metal unless you had the spine to back it up. Clayton dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, tied his horse, and walked inside. 5 minutes later, he came back out with Blake, both of them heading toward the church. Josiah stood setting his rifle against the doorframe, and walked down to meet them. "You are Brennan," Clayton said. "Not a question." Statement of fact, Josiah Brennan. Used to scout for the Army out of Fort Laramie. Clayton nodded once the acknowledgement of one veteran to another. "Got your telegram. Also got an interesting letter from Judge Morrison saying I should disregard it. That told me everything I needed to know about whose side the judge is on." He glanced at Blake. "Deputy Blake here spent the last hour bringing me current. Sounds like you kicked over a hornet's nest." "Was not trying to," Josiah said. "Just cut a nun loose from a tree, and things spiraled from there." Clayton's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. Things have a way of spiraling when fraud and murder are involved. They walked to the church together. Inside, Sister Catherine was helping Father Wright prepare breakfast for the small group that had spent the night there. She looked up when they entered, saw Clayton's badge, and something in her shoulders relaxed. Official law had arrived. Whatever came next would at least have the appearance of process. Sister Catherine Moore, Clayton said, removing his hat. "I would like to hear your story. All of it. Start from the beginning." She told it while they ate, the whole narrative from finding the forged land title to being tied to the tree to everything that had happened since. Clayton listened without interrupting his eyes, never leaving her face, reading the truth in her bruises and her steady voice and the way she did not embellish or perform. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. "I am going to need to see that birth certificate," he said finally, "and the forged land title. And I am going to need to talk to Martin Hayes and examine that ledger myself." Ellen Harper spoke from the doorway. "I can show you the rope too. The one used to tie her up. Tom Warren saved it." Clayton looked at her. "You are the store owner." "Ellen Harper." She nodded. "And Sister Margaret's sister." Clayton's expression shifted slightly. "I remember that case. Summer of 1823. I was deputy in Laramie then. We sent men to help with the search." "Did they look on Mercer property?" Ellen asked. "They looked everywhere," Clayton said. "But William Mercer's father was alive then. He led the search party, made sure they were thorough, or seemed thorough." Ellen's voice went hard. "Did anyone think to search for places a body might be buried?" Clayton met her eyes. "Not enough to dig. We had no cause, no evidence of foul play, just a missing woman in a habit by the river." "You have cause now," Ellen said. "Another nun. Same pattern, same land dispute." Clayton stood. "Then I had better start looking." They moved as a group to the sheriff's office, where William Mercer and Martin Hayes sat in separate cells, both men having spent an uncomfortable night on thin mattresses and their own thoughts. William looked up when Clayton entered, his face showing relief. "Sheriff Clayton," William said, "thank God, this has been a terrible misunderstanding. I am glad you are here to sort it out." Clayton studied him the way a man studies a horse he is thinking of buying, looking for flaws that might not be immediately visible. "Mr. Mercer, I'm going to need you to answer some questions." "Of course, I am happy to cooperate. This whole situation is tragic. Sister Catherine needs help, real psychiatric help, and instead she has been enabled in these delusions by people who should know better." Clayton turned to Hayes in the other cell. "Mr. Hayes, Deputy Blake says you confessed to helping forge a land title. That true?" Hayes looked at the floor. "Yes, sir. You do it willingly." Hayes's voice was barely audible. "He had leverage on me, money I borrowed from the county treasury, said he would report me if I did not help. And you let him into the office to alter the records." "Yes, sir." Clayton turned back to William. "That is conspiracy to commit fraud. Also blackmail. Both hanging offenses in this territory." William's face remained calm, but his hands resting on his knees had gone white-knuckled. "I deny all of it. You have the word of a confessed embezzler against a respected landowner and investor. Any jury will see that Hayes is lying to save himself." "Then let us look at the evidence," Clayton said. They walked to the county office, Clayton examining the ledger with the careful attention of a man who knew that details mattered. He studied the forged entry, held it up to the light, compared the ink color to the entries above and below it. Then he took out a small knife and gently scraped at the edge of the entry. "Paper has been erased here," he said. "You can see the scarring. And this ink is different, newer, applied over the erasure." He looked at Sister Catherine. "You said Mother Agnes was in New Orleans in March of 1828. "Yes, sir." "I have letters from her to the convent here dated that month with New Orleans postmarks." "Bring them to the courthouse tomorrow," Clayton said. "We will have a hearing." Full evidence presentation. I will send for a judge from Laramie, someone who is not related to Mr. Mercer. William's lawyer will object, Blake said. William's lawyer can object all he wants, Clayton replied. This is territorial business now. Fraud, possible murder, corruption of county officials. That puts it in my jurisdiction. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Sister Catherine retrieved letters from the convent, decades of correspondence that established Mother Agnes's whereabouts in 1828. Ellen Harper brought her store ledgers showing rope purchases. Tom Warren wrote out a statement about seeing William buy the rope and specifically requesting it not be recorded in the store's account book. And Josiah, at Clayton's request, drew a map of Mercer property showing exactly where Sister Catherine had been tied, marking the boot prints he had seen, noting the position of the ranch house and the line of sight from the main road. You have got a good eye for detail, Clayton observed, studying the map. 20 years tracking for the Army, Josiah said. You learn to see what is there and what should be there, but is not. Like what? Like why William positioned her exactly where passing traffic would see her, but made no effort to hide what he had done. He wanted her found, wanted people to see the sign calling her dangerous. The cruelty was not private, it was performance. Clayton nodded slowly. Public humiliation is legal strategy. Make her testimony worthless by making everyone think she is insane before she ever gets to court. That evening, sitting on the church steps again, with his rifle across his knees, Josiah watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple and thought about what came next. The hearing tomorrow would be crucial. If Clayton could present the evidence clearly, if Sister Catherine could testify credibly, if the judge was honest, then William Mercer would face justice. But those were a lot of ifs. Sister Catherine came out and sat beside him, bringing 2 cups of coffee that Father Wright had brewed strong enough to strip rust. They drank in comfortable silence, watching the day fade. I have been thinking about what Ellen said. Sister Catherine finally spoke, about renouncing my vows. And I do not know if I can. The convent is the only home I have ever known. The sisters are my family. The children we teach are my purpose. If I renounce my vows, what am I? A landowner, Josiah said. A woman with the power to protect what your father built, but not a nun. No, not a nun. Sister Catherine stared at her coffee. There is a verse in Matthew about houses built on sand versus houses built on rock. I always thought my faith was the rock, but maybe the rock is supposed to be something else. Maybe it is supposed to be knowing who you are. Josiah thought about Rachel's letter, about duty and fear, and the difference between them. Your father gave you that land for a reason, not to trap you, to protect you. But I do not want to be protected, Sister Catherine said. I want to be useful. Then be both, Josiah replied. Own the land, protect it, and use it the way the convent always has, for teaching, for farming, for helping people who need help. You do not have to choose between your father's legacy and your own. Sister Catherine looked at him. You make it sound simple. It is not simple, Josiah said, but it is right, and sometimes that is enough. The night passed without incident. William's 3 hired men did not return. The street stayed quiet, and when dawn came cold and clear, it brought with it the weight of what the day would demand. The courthouse filled early, people drawn by the promise of drama and the reality that this was their community's business. Land fraud affected everyone. Corrupt officials affected everyone. A missing nun from 8 years ago who might have been murdered affected everyone. This was not entertainment. This was the kind of reckonings that defined who a town wanted to be. Judge Samuel Pierce arrived from Laramie on the morning stage, a man in his 60s with white hair and the kind of face that looked like it had been disappointed by humanity too many times to be surprised anymore. He took his position behind the bench without ceremony, looked at the packed courtroom, and rapped his gavel once. This is a territorial hearing on charges of land fraud, conspiracy, and possible murder. He said, I have reviewed the preliminary evidence. I have spoken with Sheriff Clayton, and I am prepared to hear testimony. Mr. Mercer, you have counsel. A lawyer stood young and nervous, clearly out of his depth. Your Honor, I am representing Mr. Mercer on a temporary basis. We request a continuance to prepare a proper defense. Denied, Judge Pierce said flatly. The evidence is straightforward. Either Mr. Mercer committed fraud or he did not. Present your defense now or sit down. The lawyer sat down. Sheriff Clayton Pierce said, "Present your case." Clayton stood and began methodically laying out the evidence. The birth certificate proving Sister Catherine's parentage. The forged land title with its mismatched ink and scraped paper. Mother Agnes's letters from New Orleans, dated during the months she supposedly signed the transfer. Martin Hayes' confession. Tom Warren's testimony about the rope purchase. Each piece of evidence was entered into the record. Each witness called to testify to him. And through it all, William Mercer sat with perfect calm, as if this was a minor inconvenience rather than the unraveling of everything he had built. When it came time for Sister Catherine to testify, the courtroom went silent. She walked to the witness chair with steady steps, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Judge Pierce looked at her with something that might have been sympathy or might have been respect. "Sister Catherine," he said, "in your own words, tell us what happened." She told the story again, but this time it was different. This time she was not explaining to friends who already believed her. This time she was speaking for the record, for history, for a system that would either vindicate her or dismiss her. Her voice never wavered. She did not cry or perform. She just told the truth. When she finished, William's lawyer stood to cross-examine. "Your Honor, this woman is under psychiatric observation order. Her testimony is suspect." Judge Pierce looked at him. "She seems perfectly lucid to me. Do you have evidence of mental instability beyond Judge Morrison's say-so?" The lawyer hesitated. "The order was issued by a duly appointed judge." "Judge Morrison is Mr. Mercer's uncle," Pierce said dryly. "I am not inclined to give his orders much weight in this proceeding." "Do you have actual evidence?" The lawyer sat down. Pierce turned to William. "Mr. Mercer, you have the right to testify in your own defense." William smoothed his vest and took the witness chair with the confidence of a man who believed he could talk his way out of anything. "Judge Pierce," he said, "this is a conspiracy against me by people who want to steal my property. I legally acquired the land title 3 years ago through proper channels. The county clerk verified the signature. The county recorded the transaction. Everything was done according to law, except the signature was forged," Pierce said. "So Sister Catherine claims. But she is an interested party. She stands to gain financially by discrediting my ownership." Clayton stood. "Your Honor, may I?" Pierce nodded. Clayton walked to the evidence table and picked up a length of rope. "Mr. Mercer, do you recognize this?" "No," William said. "Tom Warren witnessed the purchase. He says you specifically requested it not be recorded in the store's account." "Tom Warren is mistaken," William said smoothly. "Or lying. Why would he lie, I do not know. Perhaps Sister Catherine paid him. Perhaps he has his own grudge against me." Judge Pierce leaned forward. "Mr. Mercer, you've been a judge for 30 years. I have heard a lot of creative explanations. But what you are suggesting requires a conspiracy involving a nun, a store owner, a livery hand, a county clerk, a former deputy, and a mountain man who does not even live in this town. That seemed likely to you." William's calm cracked just slightly. "Your Honor, these people are determined to steal my land. They have fabricated evidence, coerced confessions, and now they are using the power of the court to legitimize their theft." Ellen Harper stood from the gallery. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Pierce looked at her. "You are a witness in this case. I am now." Ellen said, "I am Sister Margaret's sister, the nun who disappeared 8 years ago." The courtroom murmured. Pierce rapped his gavel. "Come forward, Mrs. Harper." Ellen walked to the witness chair, was sworn in, and told her story. Sister Margaret investigating land irregularities. Sister Margaret mentioning William Mercer's name in letters home. Sister Margaret disappearing. The habit found by the river. The search party led by William's father that somehow never searched William's property thoroughly. "Did you report your suspicions at the time?" Pierce asked. "I tried," Ellen said. "But I was a woman with no proof, just a feeling. The territorial marshal told me drowning was the most likely explanation. Told me to accept it and move on. And now we have another nun, another land investigation, another attempted silencing. The pattern is clear." Pierce looked at William. "Mr. Mercer, where is Sister Margaret's body?" "I have no idea," William said. "She drowned. Tragic accident." "Did she?" Pierce asked. "Or is she buried somewhere on your property?" "That is speculation without evidence," William's lawyer protested. "Then let us get evidence," Pierce said. He looked at Clayton. Sheriff, I am authorizing you to search Mercer property. Look for any signs of burial, disturbed earth, stone cairns, anything that might indicate human remains. William's face went pale. Your Honor, you cannot do that. You cannot violate my property rights based on 8-year-old speculation. I can, when there is probable cause to believe a crime was committed on that property, Pierce said. Search begins today. The hearing recessed. Clayton organized a search party. 20 men, some with shovels, some with probes, all with the grim determination of people who knew they might find something they did not want to see. Josiah joined them, guiding them to the fallen cottonwood where Sister Catherine had been tied. This is where he staged her, he said, visible from the road. But if he was hiding something, he would want it farther in. Somewhere people do not naturally go. They spread out, working in a grid pattern, probing the ground for soft spots, looking for depressions that might indicate old digging. The sun climbed, the heat built, and for 3 hours they found nothing. Then Tom Warren called out from near a dry wash, "Got something here." The men gathered. The earth at that spot was different, less compacted with vegetation that looked newer than the surrounding growth. Clayton knelt, felt the soil, nodded to the men with shovels. "Dig carefully," he said. "If there is something here, I want it intact." They dug slowly, removing earth in careful layers. 2 feet down, they hit cloth. Black cloth rotted by time and earth, but still recognizably a nun's habit. Clayton stopped the digging, cleared the earth with his hands, and uncovered what lay beneath. Sister Margaret had been there for 8 years. The earth had not been kind, but enough remained to tell the story. The skulls showed trauma, a crack consistent with being struck from behind. The ribs showed where they had been broken, and around the neck bones, corroded but still present, was a length of old rope with the same distinctive knots. Clayton said quietly, "But the knots match. Same style, same training." Ellen Harper knelt beside the grave, her face dry, but filled with something beyond tears. "I knew," she whispered. "I always knew." They brought William Mercer to the site, and chains made him look at what they had found. His face showed nothing, no guilt, no remorse, just calculation. "That proves nothing," he said. "Could be anyone. Could have been there before my family owned this land." "The knots tell a different story," Clayton said. "And Sister Margaret disappeared while investigating land fraud. Just like Sister Catherine." "Coincidence," William said. Judge Pierce, standing at the edge of the grave, shook his head. "Mr. Mercer, I have seen a lot in my years on the bench, but I have never seen someone as coldly calculating as you. You murdered one nun and tried to destroy another, all for money." William's eyes went hard. "You cannot prove I killed anyone. That body could have been there for decades, could have been put there by someone else." "The rope proves connection," Pierce said. "The pattern proves motive, and your own arrogance in using the same method twice proves intent." "That is enough for me." He looked at Clayton. "Sheriff, add murder to the charges. We will have a full trial with a jury, but Mr. Mercer stays in custody until then. No bail." As they led William away, he looked back at Sister Catherine, standing at the grave's edge. "This is not over," he said. "I have resources. I have lawyers. I will appeal this to every court in the territory." Sister Catherine met his eyes. "You killed my teacher. You tried to kill me. You stole land that belonged to my father. And you did it all without ever once thinking about the people you hurt. That is what makes you dangerous, not your resources. Your complete inability to see other people as human." William had no answer to that. They took him back to the jail, and the search party began the careful work of excavating Sister Margaret's remains for proper burial. Ellen Harper stayed by the grave long after the others left, saying goodbye to the sister she had lost 8 years ago and finally found. Sister Catherine sat with her 2 women who had both lost someone to the same man's greed, united now in grief and vindication. That evening, Judge Pierce called Sister Catherine to his chambers. She entered nervously, unsure what this summons meant. Pierce gestured to a chair. "Sit down, sister. We need to talk about your situation." Sister Catherine sat. Pierce opened a folder containing the birth certificate and land documents. "According to this evidence, you are the rightful owner of 640 acres, including all improvements and water rights. That makes you one of the wealthier people in this territory." "I do not want wealth," Sister Catherine said. "I want justice." "You have got justice," Pierce said. "Mercer will hang for murder. Hayes will serve time for fraud. The land title will be corrected in the records. But that leaves the question of what happens next. He looked at her steadily. You took vows of poverty. Nuns cannot own property. But if you renounce those vows, you can claim your inheritance and protect it. The railroad deal still stands. They still need water rights. And they will pay $50,000 for them. Sister Catherine swallowed. That is a fortune. It is also leverage, Pierce said. You could sell them rights to the water, but keep the land. You could negotiate terms that protect the convent and school. You could ensure that your father's legacy serves the purpose he intended. But I would have to stop being a nun. You would have to become something else, Pierce corrected. A landowner, a businesswoman, a protector of the orphans and teachers who depend on that land. Is that so different from what a nun does? Sister Catherine looked at her hands. I do not know if I am strong enough. You were tied to a tree and did not break, Pierce said. You walked into a courtroom and told the truth knowing it might not be believed. You stood over your teacher's grave and forgave nothing. You are strong enough. That night, Sister Catherine wrote a letter to the bishop in St. Louis. She did not renounce her vows in the letter. She explained them. Explained that sometimes faith required you to step outside the walls that protected you and take on the responsibility that the world demanded. That her father had given her a gift, and refusing it would dishonor his memory and hurt the people who depended on the land he had protected. She sealed the letter and gave it to Father Wright to send. Then she sat in the church and prayed not for guidance, but for strength to accept the guidance she had already received. Josiah found her there an hour later. You made your decision, he said. She nodded. I'm going to claim the land, negotiate with the railroad, use the money to expand the school and support the convent. Become what I need to become to protect what matters. Your father would be proud. I hope so, she said. I will never know. They sat in the quiet church, candles flickering, throwing shadows that danced on the old stone walls. Outside, the town was settling into normal rhythms again. The crisis had passed. Justice had been done, or as close to it as human systems could manage. Life would go on, but not unchanged. 2 weeks later, Sheriff Clayton presided over his Sister Margaret's funeral. The whole town attended. Ellen Harper stood at the grave with Sister Catherine and Mother Agnes and Father Wright, finally able to say goodbye properly. They buried her in the convent cemetery next to the other nuns who had died over the years, under a simple stone that read Sister Margaret, died in service, never forgotten. William Mercer's trial took 3 days. The jury deliberated for 20 minutes. They found him guilty of murder, fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen lesser charges. Judge Pierce sentenced him to death by hanging sentence to be carried out in 30 days. On the morning of the execution, Josiah stood in the crowd watching William Mercer climb the gallows steps. William's face showed nothing. No regret, no fear. Just the same cold calculation that had marked every decision he had ever made. He died without ever understanding why what he had done was wrong. Martin Hayes got 10 years for fraud and embezzlement. Deputy Blake, who had turned state's evidence and helped convict William, was pardoned for his minor role and eventually became sheriff when Clayton retired. Tom Warren used his reward money to buy his own livery stable. And Sister Catherine, no longer sister, but just Catherine Moore, landowner and protector, negotiated a deal with the railroad that gave them water rights in exchange for $75,000 and a guarantee that the convent and school would remain undisturbed in perpetuity. She used the money to build a new schoolhouse, expand the farm, and create an endowment that would support the convent for generations. She never took vows again. But she lived at the convent, taught the orphans, worked the land, and became the kind of protector her father had hoped she would be. Josiah stayed in the valley for a month after the trial, helping with the rebuilding, making sure the threats were truly gone. Then one morning he packed stubborn saddle and prepared to return to the mountains. Catherine found him at the livery. You are leaving. Time to go, Josiah said. Mountains do not wait. Will you come back? Josiah considered. Maybe, when I need coffee and company. Catherine smiled. You saved my life. You saved mine too, Josiah said, just in a different way. They shook hands, the formal gesture of people who had been through something together and come out changed. Then Josiah mounted stubborn and rode out of town, heading back to his cabin in the high country where the air was thin and the silence was complete. But it was a different silence now. Not the silence of hiding, the silence of peace. The years passed. Catherine Moore became a fixture in the valley, respected, and occasionally feared for her sharp business sense and unwillingness to be cheated. The convent thrived. The school grew. The orphans she had taught grew up and had children of their own, and those children learned to read in the schoolhouse her father's land had made possible. Josiah came down from the mountains twice a year, always staying a few days, always welcomed. He grew older. His hair went white. His hands developed the tremor that comes from too many cold nights and too much hard living. But his eyes stayed sharp and his mind stayed clear, and he remained the man who had cut a nun loose from a tree because it was the right thing to do. In 1857, 26 years after that July day, his grandson Daniel came to visit. The boy was 13, soft from city living, uncertain in the wilderness. Josiah taught him to whittle to track, to read sign, to understand that community was not about proximity, but about answering when someone called. And on a September evening with the sun painting the mountains gold and the valley spread out below them like a promise, Josiah told his grandson the whole story about Sister Catherine and the rope and William Mercer and what it meant to stand witness when evil walked in. Daniel listened, turning the whistle his grandfather had carved over in his hands. "Did you ever regret getting involved?" he asked. Josiah looked at his grandson, seeing in him the future, seeing the questions that every generation had to answer for itself. "Only regret is all the times I did not," he said. "But you were alone," Daniel protested. "You could have just stayed in the mountains." "I was dying there," Josiah said quietly. "Slowly and safely, but still dying. Sister Catherine reminded me that being alive means being part of something, means answering when someone needs help, means standing up even when it is easier to walk away." He pointed down at the valley. "See that building? The big one with the bell tower? The school, that is Catherine's school. She is not a nun anymore, but she has been teaching for 26 years now. 26 years of children who can read and write and think because one woman decided to fight for land her father gave her." Daniel was quiet, processing. "So you saved her and she saved all those kids?" "I did not save her," Josiah corrected. "I just stood with her while she saved herself. That is what community means. Being there when people need a witness. Being the person who answers the call." He handed Daniel the finished whistle. "When you blow this, someone who knows that sound will come. That is not just a promise. It is a responsibility. You have to be willing to go when someone else blows theirs." Daniel put the whistle to his lips and blew. The note rang out clear and true, echoing across the valley, carrying on the wind. And somewhere down there, perhaps in that school, perhaps in one of the farms spreading across what had once been contested ground, perhaps in the memories of people who had been there that summer of 1831, the sound was heard and remembered. Josiah Brennan died in his sleep 2 winters later, 77 years old, in the cabin he had built with his own hands. They buried him in the convent cemetery next to Sister Margaret and the other nuns because Catherine insisted that he had earned a place there. His stone read, "Josiah Brennan, Army Scout, Mountain Man, Friend." He answered the call. Daniel inherited the cabin and the trap line and the responsibility his grandfather had taught him. He came west every summer for the rest of his life, teaching his own children and grandchildren about the whistle and the valley and the man who had understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else mattered more. Catherine Moore lived to be 83, dying in 1886, surrounded by people she had taught and helped and protected. The school still bears her name. The land still provides water to the railroad and crops to the valley. And on her stone, beneath her name and dates, they carved words her father had written in his will, held in trust for those who come after. The rope that had bound Sister Catherine to that tree was kept as evidence until William Mercer's execution, then given to Catherine as a reminder. She kept it in a glass case in the school, teaching children about how some people try to silence truth with tools of oppression and how other people cut those ropes and set truth free. Years later, historians studying the period would point to the Mercer case as a turning point in territorial law, when the court started taking fraud seriously, when women's testimony started carrying weight, when the pattern of powerful men abusing the legal system started to crack. But for the people who lived through it, it was simpler than history. It was about a mountain man who chose connection over isolation, a nun who chose truth over safety, a community that chose justice over convenience, and a rope that became a symbol of both bondage and liberation, depending on who held the knife. The mountains endured as they always had, indifferent to human dramas. The Wind River still cut its path through stone. The cottonwoods still marked the seasons with their changing leaves. And somewhere in those mountains and clearings and valleys and hidden places, the sound of a whistle occasionally rang out. A call for help, a signal between friends. A promise that someone somewhere would answer, because that is what community meant. That is what courage required. That is what one summer in 1831 had taught everyone who paid attention. Not every wrong could be righted. Not every villain faced justice. Not every victim survived to tell their story. But sometimes when the right people stood in the right place at the right time, when they chose involvement over safety and truth over convenience, the world bent a little bit towards something better. And that was enough. It had to be enough. Because in the end, Josiah thought in those final moments before sleep took him, that last winter night, that is all any of us could do. Stand up when it mattered. Cut the ropes that bound people. Be the person who answered the call. Rachel had been right in her letter all those years ago. Duty that kept you from people was not duty. It was fear. And the world needed soft men who could be strong, who could feel and care, and still do what needed doing when evil walked in. The whistle Daniel carried east with him back to St. Louis, and his city life served him well. He blew it twice in his lifetime when he needed help, and both times someone answered. And he answered others who blew theirs, creating the kind of network his grandfather had tried to explain, the kind of community that transcended geography and connected people through shared values and mutual responsibility. The story passed down through generations, changing slightly with each telling, but keeping its core truth intact. By the time the 20th century arrived, bringing with it automobiles and electric lights in a world that seemed to have forgotten what the old world knew, there were still people who remembered, who told their children about the mountain man and the nun and the rope and what it meant to stand witness, who taught their grandchildren that courage was not absence of fear, but decision to act despite it, who kept the whistle and the story and the lesson alive, because some lessons are too important to forget, some stories too essential to let die, some values too fundamental to abandon just because the world gets complicated. And sometimes on quiet evenings in the mountains when the wind is right and the stars are bright and the world seems to be listening, you can still hear it. The clear, sharp note of a whistle calling across the valley, asking for help, offering help, reminding everyone who hears it that we are not alone, that we are part of something larger than ourselves, that when someone calls, someone answers. And that is the rope that binds us, not bondage, connection, the kind that cannot be cut because it is woven from choice and courage and the decision to be part of something that matters.